I don't remember the last time when the very first episode of a show made me cry, but Frieren did it. Hi everyone, I finally started watching Frieren. I tend to get into new shows way too late, but hey, it's better late than never because episode 1 of Frieren alone already looks like a very promising story that I think I will really enjoy. To celebrate this new beginning, I also tried to draw one of my favorite shots from episode 1. Honestly, I really messed up with this drawing and I am not happy with it. But who cares? Sometimes you succeed, sometimes you mess up, and both are equally important. Before getting into the show, I knew pretty much nothing. I didn't watch any trailers or read any summaries, and the only things that I knew was that it was a proper fantasy show with magic and stuff. I knew that Frieren was the name of the main character. I also knew that there was a girl named Fern, and I've also seen the design of a red-haired boy, but that's it. The only other thing I heard is that people love this show like a lot. And it's been sitting on my list of things that I want to watch pretty much since the show's release. So let's not waste any more time and get into my review and thoughts about episode 1. I want to start with Frieren herself. When you have fantasy stories with beings who can live for a very long time, most of the times the protagonist is someone young, someone who can experience the magical world for the first time alongside the viewers. In fact, at the moment, I can't think of a single other story where the main protagonist would be an ancient being, and that alone already makes the premise of Frieren stand out. I also feel like this allows for the story to go into some very heartbreaking and philosophical territory. I mean, episode 1 already was pretty heavy despite the relatively light tone in how it's presented, and if that's indicative of the tone the rest of the show will have, then I am all here for it. I love it when stories can balance heavy and light, something heartbreaking with something hopeful, and that contrast allows both emotions to shine even more. Frieren's age also makes her demeanor stand out from other characters, and what I like is that it's not presented as something bad. The random people who criticized her during the funeral are painted in a negative light, while her friends who defended her are painted in a positive light. Yes, we see many scenes where Frieren just doesn't understand people around her, but that's because everyone views the world through their own personal lens, and that's not inherently bad. The question is, are you open to trying to understand the other side? And Frieren is. For example, after Himmel dies, she declares that she wants to try and understand people better, and that's a nice quality for your protagonist to have. It promises me that she will have a proper character arc and character change despite already being ancient. I'll talk more about Frieren and her journey a bit more later on, but I also want to touch upon the general premise of the show. It's called Beyond Journey's End, and this is literally what we get in this first episode. We start at the end. We start where the journey ends. We don't even get a glimpse of this Demon King that's been defeated, other than the fireworks display. Once again, that's very unique, but what I like even more is how we can interpret that thematically. Maybe sometimes the most meaningful things in life aren't what we think they are supposed to be. Maybe the story that is worth telling isn't about the Demon King, but about what comes after that. Maybe the story that is worth telling is about the people we meet and what we learn when we slow down and begin actually paying attention to our lives. And since I already started speaking about themes, let's try to analyze what other themes did this first episode hint at. The most obvious ones are life, death, and passage of time. And speaking of time, I also loved how this episode explored not only how time passes faster for someone like Frieren, but also how we, as people, can live slower or faster. I think it would be easier if I explained it through specific examples. So, for example, Himmel, immediately after returning home, was already thinking about a new job, and we saw how surprised Frieren looked at that. She has an abundance of time, so she just doesn't need to think about the next thing immediately. Another example is when she returned after 50 years and noticed that the city changed a lot. People don't live all that long, so they have to move fast. They have to make progress fast. They have to use their time wisely and effectively, while Frieren, as an elf, can just spend 50 years or a whole century on the exact same thing, like looking for new spells. It was also emphasized how time is precious, regardless of whether you are a human or an elf. For human, 10 years is a whole decade, but Frieren saw that same time as a mere 10 years adventure. The difference is that her friends appreciated that time. They thought of Frieren as a dear friend. They felt like they got to really know her, while Frieren felt like she barely knew them, like this time was insignificant, which she later regretted. She wished she had gotten to know Himmel better and used the time with him more wisely, even if, for her, that time passed like a blink of an eye. Being alive is not the same as actually living and being present. When you don't have much time, you are aware of that fact. You try to live to the fullest, but Frieren just wasn't thinking about that until she was faced with the death of a friend. Another theme we could get into is belonging. Frieren felt quite alone in this episode, and maybe there's even an aspect of avoiding getting close to people when she knows she will outlive them. And finally, we have a theme of connections and relationships. This first episode introduced no conflict plot-wise. I don't know if the story is more episodic or if there's a continuous storyline. I don't know if there's any big overarching villain, and that's more than okay, because this first episode focused on characters and their connections, and that's much more important. Even the most interesting plot is meaningless if you don't care about the characters who are living that plot, and the story of Frieren focused on making you care in the very first episode. And that's all I have for the more general things. So now, let's get into a few specific details. First, I wonder if we'll ever see Himmel, Eisen, and Heiter again, and what I mean by that is whether we will get to see their younger selves again. Sure, there's a good possibility that we are already done with their stories. Himmel is already gone, Heiter is very old, and Eisen, as a dwarf, is the only character we might see in the future of this story, and that would be a perfectly fine decision. I don't think that this story needs these characters to be good. But all three of them in their younger days had unique enough personalities and unique enough character designs that it's kind of hard to believe that we are done with them for good. What I think we might get are two parallel stories, one with Frieren's past adventure party through flashbacks, and one with her current party, and both these stories would highlight what is Frieren doing differently this time around. Other than seeing this trio in flashbacks, this episode also introduced the concept of resurrection and immortality magic, so getting these characters back fully is also on the table. At this point, I feel like bringing them back would contradict the themes that were already established, but it depends on how it's done. The very beginning of this episode also mentioned a place called Aureola, I don't know how it's pronounced, a place where you can talk to the souls of your old friends. So we could meet Himmel and potentially Heiter later on too in that place. I am also curious about that quote as a whole. It looks like a passage from the book that Frieren was reading in the carriage, but the words also feel like they apply to her perfectly. I could even see a twist that this is something that she herself writes down the line under a different name. But for now, that symbolic connection is more than enough. Another interesting detail was a mural of an elf with 4 birds above her, with this very saint-like imagery. Things like that don't just appear on screen on accident, so I am pretty sure that as the story progresses, that mural will gain a deeper meaning. We will learn the story behind that painting and how that story connects to Frieren. After Himmel's funeral, Frieren was also holding a ring. It looks like it might have been Himmel's ring, so that's another thing that I should keep an eye on. But the most important thing to discuss is the ending of the episode with Fern and Heiter. So, Heiter gives Frieren a grimoire from the tomb of Ewig the Sage that supposedly contains spells of resurrection and immortality. At this point, I'm convinced that Heiter is lying about something, I'm just not sure about what yet. I don't think it's necessarily anything malicious, but it's probably something selfish. He also kind of manipulated Frieren. He made a request he probably knew she would refuse, and then he got her to accept the first request by making a different one. It's all a bit complicated, and I am sure he's withholding some information. I just can't prove it yet. It was also surprising that there was a total lack of reaction to the possibility of magic that can resurrect people or give you immortality. Usually in stories, that kind of magic is really demonized. It's seen as wrong. But Frieren looks fully ready to give immortality to Heiter if she can achieve that. And that's one of the reasons why earlier in my review I didn't fully dismiss the possibility that Himmel might come back. And lastly, let's talk about Fern. She's such an intriguing character. She reminds me of Frieren, but that's a depressing thought. Frieren is ancient, while Fern is just a child, yet she's so muted and tired-looking. She's obviously been established as a war orphan, so that explains a lot, but still. Most children would be thrilled by the possibility of learning magic, but Fern just said that she only somewhat likes it. I could even see something like magic being at least partially responsible for the death of her parents. Before I end this video, I have to talk about the visuals too. The episode looked stunning, as simple as that. Every shot looked like a mini painting. It was also a bit surprising to see how much negative space this episode used in the composition of the shots. I feel like it's a pretty rare thing to see in an anime. The animation was also alive. Even the people in the background were animated. I think all of that created this sense of wonder, of magic, of how big the world is, but also how simply impossible it is to experience all of it. So yeah, overall, I'm really impressed with the first episode of Frieren, and I can't wait to continue watching it and seeing where the story takes me. If you liked this video, let me know. If you didn't like it, also let me know. But for now, thank you for your time, and hopefully I will see you for the review of episode 2.